Hello, fam. Welcome to The Real Place, a place where real women share real stories. Before we dive into this beautiful story, please kindly subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your thoughts below. The leather seat beneath me felt like a confession booth as I slumped into the Uber, my professional mask finally cracking. Another interview, another polite rejection wrapped in corporate speak. "We'll be in touch," they'd said, their eyes already dismissing me before I'd even left the room. I pressed my palms against my burning eyes, trying to hold back the tears that had been building for 8 months. 8 months of this dance, the careful preparation, the rehearsed answers, the forced confidence that felt more like performance art than authenticity. "Everything okay back there?" His voice cut through my spiral, warm and unhurried. Not the obligatory small talk most drivers offered, but something different. Something that made me look up at the rearview mirror where kind eyes met mine. Just another day in paradise, I managed, attempting my usual deflection. But my voice cracked on the last word, betraying me. He didn't push, didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, he adjusted the mirror slightly, and I caught something in his expression, recognition maybe, like he'd been where I was sitting. "Miguel," he said simply, introducing himself as if we were meeting at a coffee shop instead of in his car where I was falling apart. "Emma." The name felt foreign on my tongue, like I'd forgotten who I was beyond the rejection letters and unanswered applications. "Emma," he repeated, and somehow the way he said it made it sound like it mattered. Like I mattered. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was expectant, like the pause before a storm that might wash everything clean. I found myself studying his hands on the steering wheel, steady and sure, wondering when I'd last felt that certain about anything. "You know," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be, even when it doesn't feel like it." Something in his tone made me believe him, made me want to believe him. And for the first time in months, I felt the tight knot in my chest begin to loosen, just slightly. Before that ride, I'd perfected the art of invisible drowning. My apartment had become a shrine to professional rejection. Neat stacks of printed resumes, color-coded spreadsheets tracking applications, and a coffee table littered with self-help books I'd bought but never opened. I'd tell my sister I was being selective, tell my friends I was taking time to find the right fit. But the truth was, I'd started to believe I was fundamentally broken, missing some essential component that made other people hireable, lovable, worth keeping around. The mornings were the worst. I'd wake up with a split second of normalcy before reality crashed back. The empty inbox, the silent phone, the growing gap in my resume that felt like a canyon widening between who I used to be and who I was becoming. I'd built my entire identity around being capable, around being the one others turned to when they needed something fixed or someone to lean on. My friends called me their rock, their voice of reason. But rocks, I'd learned, were good at holding things up and terrible at asking for help when they started to crumble. The worst part wasn't the rejections themselves. It was how they'd seeped into every corner of my self-perception. I'd catch myself apologizing for taking up space, for breathing too loudly, for existing in a world that seemed to have no place for me. My mother's voice echoed in my head during those dark 3 a.m. moments. "Emma, you're so strong. You can handle anything." But what happens when strength becomes a prison? When being reliable means being invisible? When being capable means being taken for granted? I'd started avoiding mirrors, started wearing the same black blazer to every interview because it felt like armor. But armor, I was learning, was heavy, and I've been carrying it for so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like to move freely. That morning, staring at my reflection before the interview, I barely recognized myself. When had I become this hollow version of who I used to be? The car pulled to a stop at a red light, and I watched people crossing the street, all of them seemingly knowing exactly where they belonged. Miguel's eyes found mine in the mirror again. "You know what I see when I look at you?" he said, his voice cutting through my internal noise. I almost laughed. A disaster in a discount blazer? But he didn't smile. "I see someone who's forgotten who she is underneath all that trying." The light turned green, but he didn't move immediately. Cars behind us honked, and still he waited, letting his words settle between us like seeds in fertile ground. "I used to be in corporate," he continued, finally pulling forward. 15 years climbing ladders, collecting titles, checking boxes. Then one day, I realized I was living someone else's definition of success. I found myself leaning forward, drawn by something in his voice, a certainty I hadn't heard in months. "What changed?" I asked, surprising myself with the question. I stopped trying to convince people I was worth something and started believing it myself. The simplicity of it hit me like a physical blow. When had I stopped believing in my own worth? When had I started measuring myself solely by other people's opinions? "Easier said than done," I whispered. "Everything worth doing is," he said, and I caught him watching me in the mirror again. "But here's the thing, you're already doing the hardest part, which is showing up. Every interview, every application, every morning you get out of bed when the world feels like it's against you. That's not weakness, Emma. That's warrior stuff. Warrior stuff." No one had ever called me a warrior. I'd been called dependable, responsible, mature for my age, but never a warrior. The word wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't know I needed, warm and protective and utterly foreign. I felt tears threatening again, but this time they felt different. Less like defeat, more like relief. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. His answer came without hesitation, "Because sometimes we need someone to remind us who we are when we've forgotten." Miguel pulled into a parking space near my apartment building, but neither of us moved to end the ride. The meter kept running, and I should have cared about the cost, but all I could focus on was the way his words had cracked something open inside me. "Can I tell you something?" he said, turning to face me fully for the first time. "Something I wish someone had told me when I was where you are?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "You're not broken. You're not missing some essential piece that everyone else has. You're just between chapters, and you've been so focused on the last one ending that you haven't noticed the new one trying to begin. Between chapters." The phrase hit me like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. "But what if?" I started, then stopped. "What if I never find my place? What if I'm not enough? What if? What if you trusted yourself as much as you trust everyone else?" he finished gently. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility and terrifying in its simplicity. I realized I'd been holding my breath, waiting for permission to exhale, to take up space, to believe I deserved good things. I don't remember how. I admit it, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I don't remember how to trust myself. "Then start small," he said. "Start with trusting that you're exactly where you need to be right now, in this moment, having this conversation." I looked at this stranger, this Miguel who drove Uber and dispensed wisdom like medicine, and felt something shift inside me. Not a dramatic transformation, but a subtle realignment, like a bone settling back into place after being out of joint for too long. I haven't felt like myself in months, I whispered. Maybe that's because you've been trying to be who you think others want you to be instead of who you actually are. The truth of it hit me like a physical blow. When had I stopped being Emma and started being Emma the job seeker? Emma the disappointment? Emma the failure? I'm scared, I said, the admission surprising us both. Good, he said simply. Fear means you're about to do something real. The words poured out of me then, like water through a broken dam. I told him about the dreams I'd abandoned, the risks I'd stopped taking, the way I'd shrunk myself down to fit into other people's expectations. I told him about the job I'd lost, not through any fault of my own, but because of budget cuts that had nothing to do with my worth and everything to do with corporate politics. I used to be brave, I said, my voice cracking. I used to take chances, speak up in meetings, pitch crazy ideas. Now I can barely order coffee without second-guessing myself. Miguel listened without interrupting, without trying to fix or minimize or redirect. He just listened, and in that listening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. The profound relief of being heard. What changed? He asked gently. I started believing their version of me instead of my own. I realized aloud. Every rejection became proof that I wasn't good enough, smart enough, experienced enough. I started editing myself, making myself smaller, trying to become what I thought they wanted. And how's that working out for you? I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. Clearly it's not. So, what if you stopped, he said. What if you showed up as exactly who you are and let them decide if they're smart enough to recognize a good thing? The idea was so foreign, so revolutionary, that it took my breath away. Show up as myself? The real me? The one who had opinions and ideas and dreams that didn't fit neatly into job descriptions? I don't know if I remember how to be her, I admitted. She's still there, Miguel said with such certainty that I almost believed him. She's just been waiting for you to remember that she matters. Tears were flowing freely now, and I didn't try to stop them. They felt like something being released, like pressure finally finding its way out. I'm so tired of pretending I'm okay, I whispered. Then stop, he said simply. Stop pretending. Stop performing. Stop auditioning for a life that doesn't fit you. In that moment, sitting in the back of an Uber with this unexpected stranger, I felt more like myself than I had in months. The ride ended, but the conversation didn't. Miguel handed me his business card, not for his Uber services, but for the coaching practice he'd started after leaving corporate. For when you're ready to remember who you are, he said. I sat in my apartment afterward, the card on my coffee table like a small beacon of possibility. Everything looked the same. The rejection letters, the untouched self-help books, the neat stacks of failure. But something fundamental had shifted. I picked up my phone and did something I hadn't done in months. I called my sister and told her the truth. Not the carefully curated version where I was taking my time and being selective, but the raw, messy reality of feeling lost and scared and completely uncertain about everything. Emma, she said after I finished, I've been waiting for you to stop pretending you were okay. Was it that obvious? You're my sister. I know when you're drowning, even when you're doing it quietly. The relief of being known, truly known, was overwhelming. I'd spent so much energy maintaining the facade of having it all together that I'd forgotten how good it felt to just be human. Over the next few days, I found myself moving differently through the world. Not with more confidence exactly, but with less apology. I stopped editing my thoughts before speaking them. I started wearing colors again instead of hiding in black blazers. The applications I sent out began to sound like me instead of like someone trying to be what she thought others wanted. The interviews felt less like performances and more like conversations. I didn't get the next job I interviewed for, but for the first time, the rejection didn't feel like a verdict on my worth. It felt like a mismatch, nothing more. Miguel's words echoed in my head. You're between chapters. I was beginning to understand that the space between chapters wasn't emptiness. It was possibility. 3 weeks later, I walked into another interview, but this time I wasn't auditioning for acceptance. I was exploring whether we were a good fit for each other. The shift in perspective was everything. When they asked about the gap in my employment, I didn't apologize or make excuses. I talked about the time I'd taken to reassess my priorities, to figure out what I wanted from my career instead of just what I thought I should want. When they asked about my weaknesses, I didn't give some clever non-answer about being too much of a perfectionist. I talked about learning to trust my instincts again, about the value of vulnerability in leadership, about how my recent struggles had taught me empathy that would make me a better colleague. I didn't get that job either, but something interesting happened. I started a consulting practice. Small at first, just helping other women who were struggling with career transitions. But it grew, fed by the authenticity I'd rediscovered in the back of that Uber. Miguel became a friend, a mentor, a reminder that sometimes the most important conversations happen with strangers who see us clearly enough to reflect back our own truth. He taught me that transformation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been underneath all the trying. I kept his business card in my wallet, not because I needed his coaching services, but because it reminded me of the moment I stopped performing my life and started living it. The other day, I picked up an Uber passenger who looked like I had that day, defeated, deflated, lost in the space between who she used to be and who she was becoming. I caught her eyes in the rearview mirror and asked if she was okay. Sometimes I've learned the most profound gift we can give someone is the simple act of seeing them. Really seeing them. Not the version they think they should be, but the truth of who they already are. That's what Miguel did for me. He knocked down my guards without trying, simply by recognizing my worth when I'd forgotten it existed. And in that recognition, I found my way back to myself. What would you have done in her situation? Have you ever felt drawn towards something unexpected? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, there are more like it waiting. Subscribe and hit the bell to never miss these thoughtful stories about the complexity of being a woman in today's world. Because sometimes, the stories we're hesitant to share are the ones that matter most.